Hello everyone. Sorry for the delay. Make yourselves comfortable. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about all sorts of interesting and bizarre phenomenology. The title of the talk is Hyperhuman Techniques and Technologies to Achieve Non-Drug Altered States and Altered Traits. So I'm also quite involved in the psychedelic world. So this is a picture of me having this very high density EEG headset placed on my head. It takes about an hour to get it on. It costs about £250,000. And I'm about to go in and do a DMT extended state. I was the first person in the world to do DMT extended, which is when you're actually infused continuous feed of DMT. And yeah, some crazy people think that we should just use the third dimension to live in the fifth dimension. But it is actually possible because DMT doesn't seem to have a tolerance. So therefore you are able to sit inside the peak of the experience potentially indefinitely. If you want to, so I know this is a non-drug altered states conference, but I wanted to get that in there just early. So there's loads of talks online. You can check that stuff out. So, in fact, I'm gonna, if I can get the clicker to work. There we go. So this is that's the one to look at if you want to check out what we all experienced in that time. So it was effectively, quite a limited number of people have tried we're in the pilot of the pilot, but this is a talk that you can find, New Nautics, and it's with Rick Strassman, Andrew Gallimore, and Graham Hancock, and 4 of us from Imperial who had done the study. So going back to non-drug altered states, I run the Psychedelic Society with some colleagues, and we've been running that for 5 years. That's how to use technology to get high. And there's loads of methods. Go and check out the Psychedelic Society in order to look at that. I also run the Psychonautics Club. So we're really interested in lots of different modalities, lots of different ways of changing consciousness. I think there's always going to be people that can never take drugs because they're illegal, or they just don't like the lack of control. So we're really looking to democratize these different ways of altering consciousness. This is another project I run called the Museum of Consciousness. We're going to have a session this afternoon. You can come and check it out. But this is based at Oxford University. It's all about how do we really look at the science of sound. We know that sound is incredibly powerful. Obviously, all sound changes consciousness, but we're really looking for the best example. So the challenge to the artist is, within 20 minutes, can you change consciousness in a reliable and measurable way, using the same sort of technologies that we're using at Imperial to measure changes in consciousness? So it's a bit of a honey trap because it's based at Oxford University, and also it's called the Museum of Consciousness. So we have people like Aphex Twin. We have John Hopkins, we have Orbital about to play. So loads of amazing artists, but also complete unknowns. So we're really trying to democratize the space. So if you're doing something interesting with sound, then please contact me after the talk and we can go through it. But it's not music necessarily, it's also Icaros or mantras or spoken word, trip reports, anything that changes consciousness, your favorite ghost story, etc. So moving on. So my sort of key activities in my sort of day job, apart from being a professor of media, is this key activity. So I run the Psychedelic Society incubators where we test different psychedelics in each city. So we'll do a tour. We've done a tour of Europe. We've gone to different cities, and we're sort of getting a temperature of the room of what sort of psychedelics are being made in each city. Then I do a lot of clinical and field studies in terms of those entheogens. Moist media is when you combine drugs with technology. So there's a great Reddit group called Rift Into the Mind. Rift Into the Mind is people taking things like ketamine and then doing VR, and because they've done ketamine, they've kind of forgotten they've taken a drug, and now they're in this other world. So there's loads of experiments going on where these things are moist. So moist is dry and wetware, you being the wetware, and the dryware being the technology. So I'm also really interested in dissociatives, ketamine analogs. There's so many of them. Ketamine's like the beer of the class, but there's so many others above the ketamine class, which are maybe the keys to the kingdom. Again, I'm not here to talk about drugs. And I'm really interested in taking things like the Museum of Consciousness and then building a sound hospital, for instance. So you don't go to the doctor for a prescription of pharmaceuticals, you go to the doctor for a prescription of sound. And amazingly, a woman came up to me at Medicine Festival in the UK recently and told me that in India, in the 10th century, they already had sounds that could heal specific organs in the 10th century. So there is a science of sound, and we're going to attempt to revive it. So this is me trying to tell people what I do for my day job, but it is really just looking at different ways of elevating the human experience. I think we are here to have a human experience. We're here for a very short amount of time. 1,000 months is all we get if we live like until 80 in our 80s. And I think that the big problem is that we spend a lot of time trying to hijack our human experience and live elsewhere. And I think this is why we really need to be aware of all the ways we're being hijacked. This was actually a study that was given to school kids, and they were asked, what would you rather lose, your smartphone or your sense of smell? And you can guess, they all chose to lose their sense of smell. So imagine that, like the young people of today are already so much more invested in the digital versions of themselves than that. And when you lose your sense of smell, you also lose your sense of taste very quickly, and soon after that, your sense of reality. So anyway, that was, and memory and all these other factors. Can you just do the slides for me? Just press next slide. So this is the summary of the talk. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of a perception primer. Then we're going to talk about hyperhumanism, and then we're going to talk about some of these techniques to achieve these non-drug altered states. Next slide. Next slide. So perception is not something that happens to us or in us. It's something we do. It's an active process. Next slide. Our perceptions are gambles. We believe what we see, and then we believe our interpretation of it. We don't even know we are making an interpretation most of the time. We think this is reality. Next slide. And what's super interesting is if you start to see reality as a model, it's much more likely to you're much more likely to be able to design it and much more involved in it. And it's negotiable. So first, go to the next slide.
Who knows where songs come from? You just have to sit there and relinquish all control. I think people think when you write and you create, you're the person in control and you're making all this happen as if you're, some kind of magician or something, but it's not really that. You sit there and you become an antenna and you just let things happen through you. And the more you let it happen, the more you relinquish control, I think the more beautiful it is.
Next slide. So I think that's really critical, that we are channels, right? And everyone's shitting themselves about AI and worried that they're going to be replaced. But the AI is just human culture that we're building on top of. It's all of our work. Most of it's stolen, but it is still human work. There's no sentience. It's something that we need to have an assistance with. It needs to be working with us, for us, to help with our imaginations, to help us be the best versions of ourselves. And I think the thing that we have that they don't have is a subconscious. We have all of these hidden realms that we don't actually know what they are or how to get to them. And that's really the emphasis of my research. Can you get to the next slide? So we only see 1% of the visual spectrum, and we only hear 1% of the auditory spectrum. So how do we access more of this? Go to the next slide. And I've done a whole TEDx talk at Oxford University on this question of how we're locked in. We're kind of locked in at multiple levels. When you look at yourself in the mirror, you don't see yourself as you actually are, because the images flip back to front. The only way you can see yourself is two mirrors at right angles at 90 degrees, and then you see yourself as you are. and you're like, you get cognitive dissonance because you've never seen yourself like that. Everyone else sees you as you are, but you don't. Same with your hearing, right? You hear yourself on a recording, you're like, who's that? And it's you. But it's like this cognitive dissonance because the way your hearing system is kind of forcing you into this virtual reality. You're already, like we talked about perception, you're already generating this sort of virtual reality, or that's being done for you by your biology. But then we're also tricked into things like linear perspective. We don't see a linear perspective. It was codified in the Renaissance, and all of our cameras are based around linear perspective, but we see in curvilinear perspective. So that means all of our image stuff is fundamentally flawed. Then we're stuck inside our social medias. We're stuck inside our tiny little bits of real estate on our phones. And, the love of your life walks past and you just miss her because you were on your phone, So it's like we're during the pandemic, we're also locked into this idea of a no optic flow. So optic flow is when you're moving through space, you create optic flow, which is things moving in your peripheral vision. So how can these techniques help us break out of this lockdown? And Nietzsche talks about it quite succinctly. What does man actually know of himself? Is he indeed ever able to perceive himself completely as if laid out in a lighted display case? Does nature not conceal most things from him, even concerning his own body, in order to confine and lock him within a proud, deceptive consciousness, aloof from the coils of the bowels, the rapid flow of the bloodstream, and the intricate quivering of the fibers? She threw away the key. So how do we get back in? How do we understand ourselves really from these other perspectives? The other perspectives being other kingdoms, other species. We're obsessed with a very human-centric ideology, but what about how other species are seeing us? And then we've got these attention wars. We're locked into these social media algorithms, and your consciousness is your attention, so be very wary of when it's hijacked. If you can skip to the next slide, that's the attention one. Go to the next one. So talking a little bit about hyperhumanism, next slide. So hyperhumanism, we need to think about a new form of human becoming, which has a deeper interpretation of the potentialities of the future than transhumanism, where we just imagine AI is taken over from human becoming. Next slide.
Hey everybody, I have a wonderful life hack I think you're gonna love, okay? Stop fucking life hacking, okay? You're not a goddamn algorithm, you're not a goddamn robot. We need to hold on to our humanity. Stop appropriating robot culture, okay? Robots have told me they're offended. Stop it.
So the bad guru there, Alex Ebert, but this idea that we're not machines, so let's not aspire to become them. Next slide. So I think we're not evolutionarily equipped to deal with the level of complexity that these disruptive technologies are creating. And the new mantra is kind of be design or be design, this whole idea of ontological design. How do we use powerful tools like machine learning and AI to actually help us become more human? That's the basis of hyperhumanism, the idea that we're not even human yet. We're only scratching the surface of what we can potentially become. And I think that we've got a bit of ahead of ourselves. If you think about post-humanism, they already say it's all over. Human project's done. Then you've got the transhumanists that think we're going to emerge and become robots. Good luck, Elon. How many of you got VR headsets? Almost none. So technologies, even though we think it's kind of inevitable that everything is going to happen, I've got 10,000 records, vinyl records. How many CDs do we still use? Records have come back. Old media sometimes comes back because we're weird, and sometimes things are never adopted. So we can't really predict. We can't, I like that phrase. We can't predict the future, but we can invent it. And I think that's what we're here to do this weekend, is to meet each other, be in dialogos, and to create the future. So hyper means we may not be human yet, as I said. We must therefore seek to include the perspective of all species to really define what it means to be us. And now what's amazing about things like machine learning is that we can decode the languages of other species. This is a whole other area of research. One of the best news stories I'd say about machine learning and AI is that we may be able to speak to dolphins very quickly, very soon. Sperm whales, there's research on plant signaling, there's mycelium languages are being discovered. So what will we find out once we get into dialogue with these other kingdoms? And we may not like what we hear, as you can imagine, but I think we still need to hear it. So AI is a codified representation of human prejudice. Therefore, in order to really train the AI to maximize towards the appreciation, understanding, and betterment of life in its entirety, we need to feed the algorithm with the most appropriate version of humanity. And that version certainly does not exist yet. So that's what hyperhumanism is all about. So we put ourselves, the humanists, next slide please. The humanists put us at the top of the food chain, next slide, keep clicking. So, that's what the humanists did. They put us at the top of the food chain, clearly absolutely wrong. If we think about the mycelium have survived 5 mass extinctions and we're causing the 6th. So where's the intelligence? Who's more intelligent? Let's get real. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. So this is a talk I gave in Melbourne, and it's up against this guy in the bottom here, Ray Kurzweil. He's director of engineering at Google. Also, he started transhumanism, or at least a major advocate of it. And I did a back-to-back keynote with him, trying to sort of dismantle his argument. The main argument is that I think, and this is where hyperhumanism comes in, it's this idea that hyperhumanism examines how technology can help us to transform the human condition. So we're not getting rid of technology, we're using technology to make us better, to better our human selves. And that may mean that you just use technology a bit like stabilizers on your bike, right? You have these stabilizers on your bike, you remove them after a few months because you learn how to cycle. That's what technology should represent. It's not something that you're permanently installing, like Elon wants to put your Neuralink. So basically take your phone, directly put it in your brain, really? Like, are people going to do that? I'm not sure. I think it's perfectly fine for people that have lost part of their brain that need to be reanimated, etc. But don't depend on technology completely, because if there's a solar flare, which could happen any moment, we lose all of the internet, we lose the potential to use our phones, etc. And then you've depended on this technology to function. So it's actually the indigenous that will survive, because they've survived on nothing for millennia. And we're all caught up in this digital distance, which means that we're living in this illusion of safety, right? It's like, what happens? Just imagine if it all goes off, what would you be doing? How would you survive? Foraging, etc. These skills are this is hyperhumanism. So transhumanism requires us to become dependent on technology, which subverts our ability to develop the skills for ourselves. That's the critical bit. So in contrast, hyperhumanism uses technology as a catalyst. That's the key word. Just like with AI, don't outsource everything to the machine, because then they replace us, right? If we give them everything, it should be something where you're feeding and they're feeding. It's something that you remain the master. Next slide. So I was just going to show you this image here. So this is all the sort of the chemicals in your brain, all the different activities that you can do to change the natural endorphins, the natural drugs in your own brain. Next slide. Next slide. So Jamie Will talks about this idea of hedonic engineering, which is using certain techniques in a stack to reach, in this case, like a 5-MeO state, and that involves breath work, sex, whatever. It's a combination of these different things, and I think that we can reach these states. We know that consciousness is programmable, but what are we going to do with it? What do we want? If we're going to open up the subconscious, we're going to open up these hidden layers of reality. What are we going to do with that extra knowledge? This is the critical thing. So next slide. So we're starting to map out all these different techniques and technologies for hyperhumanism. It's things like psychogeography, being aware of the energy around you. You must sense it. I mean, Berlin's incredibly. The heavy energy, such a heavy psychogeography in Berlin. But when I'm walking down the street, I'll walk on one side of the street rather than the other, because I can feel there's something different, and you can't explain it. Tuning into these abilities, You know, dream incubation. My friends are over in Greece at the moment, and they're reviving these dream palaces where you would have gone as a community to dream together, and then you would have acted on these communal dreams. Astral bathing, like going to places where it's very dark and you can see, going there when the meteorites are coming. Again, in community. But doing peripheral vision, quick one, just do it now, like peripheral vision exercises, just defocus, stop looking at the screen, stop looking at me, just take in your whole 180-degree view and start to notice that if you really defocus, you start to calm down. Your whole physiology calms down. I do it before a big talk. Athletes do it before a big race. It's a real technique and really powerful. We're doing a Shakti mat activation in Berlin on Monday. But Shakti mats, how many of you have got Shakti mat? So quite a few of you. But Shakti mats, everyone should get a Shakti mat. It's one of the best ways for firing up your entire limbic system. If you've like overdosed, or if you've done something stupid, or you're in a panic attack, getting on a Shakti mat will calm down your heart rate quicker than most things, and it's an incredible tool just for general like back pain, any kind of pain. If you sit on these, Shakti mats should explain bed of nails. I think we've got some. I think Lucia brought some. Chi machine, I'll talk about that in a bit. But these, you're getting the idea. These sorts of things, they're common sense a lot of the time. Next slide. So we've got many different ways of altering consciousness, many different types. You know, I mean, if we talk about even hot and cold media from McLuhan said that the cold media, things like radio, reading a book, you're co-creating because you're like filling in all the imagery. Whereas hot media, things like CGI films, it's all done for you. It's more like popcorn. It's just consuming. So how can we you know, maintain this like daydreaming, this fantasy, so that our imaginations are enriched and not robbed because of the technologies that we're using. Next slide. So next slide, yeah. So some of the techniques I'm going to show you in the next 10 minutes. Body technologies, journaling, sound, cyberdelics, and umwelt hacking. And again, the core question, can these help reveal these hidden layers and these subconscious layers that can be basically essential for meta-programming? If you're able to access your backstage, which is all the detritus, all the lies, all the crap that you say to yourself, and you try and keep lying to yourself, you know, when that's revealed and you're not judging it, and this is the key thing, to turn down the volume on the default mode network, if you can turn off that brain chatter for a little while, just to be yourself, to be, you know, without the constant nagging, you know, which is essential for default mode network. You know, the default mode, we need to be nagging at ourselves to get shit done. But at certain times, we need a holiday from that. Once a month, I say, get a holiday from the self. Huxley says the same thing. Next slide. So we've got these 5 senses supposedly. No, we've got more like 50. How many of you are experiencing 50 senses? You know, how do we get to those? How do we get that knowledge back? Next slide. And then there's all these other ways, right? So there's the dance, there's the meditation, there's the fasting, there's the dark immersion. You know, there's many, 1,000 different types of meditation, 1,000 different types of breath work. If you start to stack them, start to understand them, you have to try it. You know, I'm talking to a lot of people that say, "Oh, I'm the leading expert on DMT," or the woman that I spoke to recently about Iboga. She says, "I'm the world leading expert." I said, "How is it?" "Oh, I've never done it." What? Like, how are you the expert of anything? If you're claiming to be an expert, you have to do the work. Next slide. So John Vervaeke, also really worth checking out his series on YouTube, all about, you know, the meaning crisis. How do we cope with it? What are these psychotechnologies that we can use to get there? And again, it's all the basic stuff. None of this is complicated. Next slide.
A psychological phenomenon called the Tetris effect, which says that the thing that you look at last thing at night imprints on your subconscious more strongly than anything else during the day. So when we go from being asleep to waking up, or being awake to falling asleep, they're called the hypnopompic and hypnagogic stages. And they are stages where our subconscious is very susceptible to suggestion. And so I keep my physical action board next to my bed so that I see it first thing in the morning and last thing at night.
Okay, so yeah, going into those liminal states, the hypnopompic, which is where I get it. When you wake up, right? When you're waking up, I tend to get downloads. So have an analog way of imprinting. Handwriting means it's much more likely to be remembered because you're imprinting, you're embodying it as you write it. I can't recommend that enough. I'm in the digital, but I also keep one foot firmly in the analog world, because otherwise we lose these skills and they change it the way we create, the way we think. Next slide. So this guy spent, I think, 74 days underwater, and he thinks he de-aged. De-aging yourself by changing context. There's hyperbaric chambers now where you can be simulated to go under 30 meters of underwater. Incredibly good for you. Next slide. And this is my friend Jack, who's just done a vision quest in Mexico. Jack's sort of an extremist anyway. He's not. He did a dry fast for 8 days. No water. You're not meant to survive more than 3. But apparently Russians do 11 days just regularly. It's like, so the limits of what we think, and we've learned so much of these rules about what we're capable of, what we can survive, what we can't survive. Who's done a Vipassana or a vision quest? So a few of you. I've still not done one. I'm obsessive. I'm an archivist. I'm constantly writing ideas down. I can't, I can't imagine. I mean, even doing yoga, I have a notepad next to me, and my teacher gets really angry. Like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm getting downloads." That's like this. It's not the point, So yeah. So being very modular in your thinking, creating memory palaces. Who knows what a memory palace is? Right at the back. So a memory palace. The Greek orators never wrote anything down. They had 7-hour speeches that they would just have a piece of virtual architecture in their head, like an amphitheater, and it was all about how they would move around that space, and they would trigger the whole speech just through that walk. So using a very different way of using their memories, which is superior than what we have now. So dreaming the things that he couldn't do in reality. And as he says, we're over-domesticated and over-stimulated. We need to go into slow time. If it is true that a lot of our work will be automated and it will be a certain type of work, then surely we have to take advantage of that and not do the bullshit jobs. I mean, one of the best things I heard recently was we're so asked to do so much bullshit in our jobs that now we can automate all that. And that's probably the best news for another good news story of AI, that will, the AI will do that for you. So next slide. So quick one on journaling. So as Kierkegaard said, life must be lived forwards but can only be understood backwards. How many of you journal? Almost everyone, amazing. So my journaling practice is designed to allow me to take a much more active role in constructing my story. I've written everything down for like 30 years. And I've written it from 3 levels. Content, what I did, context, what I felt, and concepts, what I thought. Highly recommend it because it's an interesting way of capturing thinking, feeling, being. A perfect data set I've got now for an AI to make an AI version of myself, but I'm not going to do it. I had a very intense lucid dream which warned me off it. So I think that we know intuitively, especially people. I imagine a lot of us in the room, that it's the full dynamic range that you need. Not just in what you're listening to in terms of your sound, but also in your life, right? We need the lowest lows and the highest highs to get the full range of the human experience. But I think it's really important to balance the Tantra and the Sutra, right? Having the discipline, having the hedonism, but making sure you get them in a good balance. It's a good way of keeping check when you're journaling it. And you find wisdom by mining your own experiences. Next slide. So this is what I said about the structure of it. So I write, and what I did, as in what I'm doing, just in digital, in a big Word document, it's about 2 million words long. The context is actually captured in all the photos I take and the videos, and then the concepts, the thinking's all done in notebooks. Because for me, the ideation is probably the most important aspect, and I really want to remember it. So that's the thing. And some of the sort of tools it gives me. Next slide. Some of the abilities it gives me is I can have a superpower, right? I can jump out of my point of view. Everyone gets losing perspective. I don't know how many times you lose perspective per day. For me, it's at least twice. And at that point, I can jump out of point of view and go into field of view and see my entire life from a bird's eye view and see the last couple of months and see that I'm actually on the path. And it's not so bad to have a bad day because you're still on the path, right? You can see the path. And then the other navigation tool, take cross sections through it, so I can look at this day, last year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and I get all these different me's, all these different versions of myself communicating again in a way that I could never have done with my actual own memory. Next slide. So just to finish with the journaling, so it creates this feedback loop. It forces me to get new material. I have to live to the maximum. I can't keep writing the same shit down. I have to, excuse my French, but you have to really, get new material. It's a bit like when you take photographs on a digital camera. 80% of them are never looked at again. Is it worth taking a photo? Is it worth doing this thing if it's going to fit into the body of work? And as Zizek says, we don't really want to get what we think we want. It's always fascinating when your life pivots and you can actually see the pivot. And it's also interesting to find out that it reveals this spiral. Life doesn't go forwards. It's not linear. It's in a spiral. And you're going to go back in time and you're going to have the same things happening. And you can see that. And then it sort of allows you to trust the process. It gives you, and you can see the necessary conditions for transcendence. It's normally the things that go horribly wrong that become your gift. Your suffering becomes your gift, and you get to see it unfold. So building in resistance and adapting, witnessing adaptability, crisis equals opportunity, really starting to see the way the reality works in this very cosmic joke kind of way. I catch myself in poverty mindset a lot, thinking very negatively, and again, this is a nice antidote. And you can see astrological transits and the effects in retrospect. I notice I write a lot more when I'm in relationship, double, because you've got this mirror. And then it also makes me realize that I only keep what I share. Next slide. So sound, next slide. Sound is an altered state. We know that sound is incredibly powerful. Patients undergoing surgery require less anesthetic when being played music. Music to premature babies is incredible. Alzheimer's the same. Next slide. We can use sound to grow plants. We also are now seeing other species making sound. I don't know if it won't work, but yeah, this on the bottom right is music made by mushrooms. It's not very good, but that's us humans judging, right? Maybe that's a bit unfair. Maybe they're absolutely loving it, those mushrooms. And did you know, actually, before we ever talk about any kind of trans conversation, that there are certain mushrooms that have 21,000 different types of sex? 21,000. Imagine the choice and the curiosity. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So music is medicine. Next slide. Maybe go next again. It might need.
Bees are very cool this way. So a hive of bees will thrum its wings in the key of C. And when you put somebody with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in the presence of a beehive, that C retunes their cognitive dissonance of post-traumatic stress, and over the course of a few months, that PTSD can go away simply by being in the resonant frequency of the key of C from bees. This is the next step of medicine, when we start to realize we are actually biophysics. We are physics before we are biology, which is to say we are energy before we are ourselves.
So yeah, really learning from the all the species and what they can offer us and what we can offer in return. It needs to be bi-directional. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about cyberdelics. Next slide. So media itself is becoming very plastic very rapidly, right? We're living in this synthetic reality now, where your voice can be captured in 3 seconds and then they can have you saying whatever you want, or whatever they want rather. And, media, deep fakes, everything becoming, including us, right? We're becoming media. It's true. Like with your modern iPhones, you've got a LiDAR scanner in the back there. You can scan your friend. They're already media, right? You're turning people into volumetrics. It's unstoppable. Next slide. So this is you can turn it down a bit. This is a game called Jack's Plank, and it's a VR game, and you go up this lift, and it's untethered. So this happens. You open the door opens, and then you've got this plank, and even though you're on the floor, because you've got an actual piece of wood, like mimicking the virtual, you can turn it up a bit again, then you're basically, your brain's going, fuck, this is real, right? And you can't override your brain. It's amazing. So that's what it looks like. And it's an amazing technology for surrender, right? So letting go is not, a lot of different psychedelics require serious letting go, but you can't let go easily, right? It's not something you can think about. You have to practice. So for me, this is your guide to practicing before we do entheogens, because you end up falling off and dying, right? You have to get used to dying. You know, all of these things are super useful. You know, all of life is about learning to die well, right? Before you die. And then when you do die, you're going to be fine. So next slide. I'm running out of time, but I'm going to get through this stuff as quickly as possible. So other psychedelics, the hypnagogic light machine, we're going to go into the King's Chamber at the end of October. We hire the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, every year, and we pay off all the police and the guards, and we get to be in there for 4 hours to do experiments. So we've done 2 years of sound experiments. Now we're doing a light experiment. We're going to sit inside the Ark of the Covenant inside the King's Chamber. Who's been in the Great Pyramid, out of interest? Just one of you at the back. Yeah, an incredible sound chamber, the King's Chamber. I haven't got time to talk about it. Talk to me afterwards. So this is, next slide. This is body swapping, which is again just achieved through one input to the other VR headset just being switched. So you're looking at your partner's body. And again, if you add another modalities like touch and you're moving your finger down your body at the same rate that they are, then you literally can body swap and gender swap. So again, moving more into these different modalities. Next slide. And next again. So Umwelt. Who's heard of Umwelt? It's a German word. You should have heard about it. So Umwelt is your sensorial system. And every species has a very different sensorial system, right? So very different ways of sensing the world. I've just heard about trees. Apparently trees, when a caterpillar starts biting on a tree, the tree can taste the caterpillar and know it's a caterpillar from the taste, because it's like tasting with its leaves, which means it then alerts through smell. It will alert all the birds around to start to come and eat the caterpillar. Incredible. So Umwelt hacking. So a lobster's brain is located in its throat, its nervous system in its abdomen, its teeth in its stomach, and its head, its kidneys in its head. It also hears using its legs, tastes with its feet. Just imagine that as a different Umwelt. Go to the next slide. Can you turn it up? Can you rewind it? Just go back a slide and come.
You can barter with birds. You start feeding a bird and you up the quality of the food that you give the bird will start bringing you back better and better gifts as an exchange for the food that you're giving it. Some videos in the last couple of weeks of ravens where they'll be feeding them and then eventually the ravens are going to bring them money. Yes, they'll bring you $20 bills. No, but yeah, how are they that smart? Think about it. Like, everyone thinks they're stupid, but they know what humans want. And if you feed them stuff that they want, they will try to bring you back something in return. They'll find a $20 on the street and bring it back to you because, like, they've got an exchange going on.
Next slide. So Merlin here says, what is it like to be a fungus? If you had no head, no heart, no center of operation, if you could taste with your whole body, if you could take a fragment of your toe or your hair and it would grow into a new you. Next slide. So I'm just trying to give you an idea of these different Umwelts, and we've done a whole project trying to build prosthetics, analog prosthetics, no digital tech. This is, imagine seeing with compound eyes, if you had like 4, 16 eyes. Next slide. And we've built these prosthetic devices that allow you to become forest or tree or octopus. And talk to me about that afterwards. Next slide. So this is the chi machine that I mentioned earlier on your left. So you put your ankles in that machine, and it's a shame we don't have one here, and it just rocks you from side to side. And then you start to go into like a snake-like experience, like you start to have this movement of a snake. And this headset that gives you 360 vision, which I've worn for a week walking around London about 10 years ago, and it's like having an owl vision. Next slide. And this is a fish being suddenly broken out of flatland because its movement are controlling the wheels. So either we're giving this fish the time of its life, or it's actually like in crisis. I still don't quite know. But this is my point. Like, why are we so fixed on humans? Let's make immersive experiences for other species. I think they'll the reports on us will be better. So next slide. Almost near the end here now. So yeah, what's it like to, we can imagine what it's like to be a character. What's it like to imagine how the land feels? Next slide. This is a sound artist that has basically gone and recorded an entire forest, a huge group of aspens in Utah considered to be a single organism. Next slide. And we also know that the Earth has a pulse. So we're living in this kind of fractal reality where there's millions of these worlds within us that all think they probably have independence. We're in this world of thinking we're independence, and I wonder what the Earth's in. It's a fascinating thing. Next slide. And this we're hearing a lot now. Nature on the board. It's kind of a really annoying term, a corporate term, which is like, yeah, we've got to talk for nature. I'm like, no, let's have nature talk for nature. This is what I told you about earlier. Language of fungi, 15 to 50 words being measured through electrical signal transmitted in the mycelium. And these are some of the projects. Next slide, sorry. And the next slide. These are some of the projects that I mentioned. Earthspecies.org is really worth checking out for all these AI machine learning projects that are decoding these other languages of other species. But as my friend, next slide, David Luke said, I love how they call it ESP, because extrasensory perception is what the shamans have always been doing. That's what I mean. The indigenous know where it's at. We're getting there through our means. The views. There's many ways up the mountain, but the view's the same at the top. And to conclude, next slide. So I think hopefully I've shown you in this talk that it's all about dealing with otherness, this idea of hybridity, whether it's our gender that's in hybrid form or whether it's our need to understand we're in a nested ecology. If we don't understand that very rapidly, we're going to wipe ourselves off the face of the earth. So it's about multiplicity, plurality, building consciousness, literacy, and therefore we'll build tolerance if we're aware of the dependencies that we are not even human, right? I think we're 53% bacteria. Don't quote me on that, but it's at least 50-50. And like, do we ever get told, or do we ever concern the fact that we are only human because of the bacteria hybridity? So we need to build in this overview effect for this meta-programming, having these holidays from the self, whatever way you can do the meta-programming, but make sure that you're sitting in your backstage, that you're working through your shadow. Build the frameworks for generating altered traits. Let's not just get there all the time with these altered states. We're just chasing our tails, trying to reach peak experiences. Let's make sure that it has lasting change and that it's a sacred thing, that we don't keep going there unnecessarily. My friend doesn't use the internet because he calls it the bigger brain until he's tried to get there himself first. And I think it's our birthright to explore our own consciousness. We're now entering a new frontier of being able to develop peripheral and parallel forms of consciousness, giving us a chance to stretch out and expand the human experience. So thank you very much. And if you can do the next slide. So if you want to contact me on any of these channels, please do. I use Facebook more against itself, so I'm kind of like trying to do interesting experiments on there, so that's probably the best place, or Instagram. I'm pretty sure we don't have any time for questions, but do we? No, I figured. All right, if you've got any questions, please come to me afterwards. Thank you, you've been amazing.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. I will be talking about, as the title says, harmonizing stress. So in the beginning, maybe I can just first introduce myself. There. So I'm Janine. Hi, I'm a holistic practitioner. I run a therapy place in Berlin-Mitte. So I have experience working actually with people, who come to me with certain health conditions, and I definitely noticed that stress plays a huge role almost with every disease, every condition. That's why it's a topic that's really dear to me, to address this. And yeah, I'm a lecturer at a school for naturopaths in Berlin. And yeah, I regularly give workshops and herbal walks. And yeah, this is the first time I actually have a big screen like this and a microphone, so I'm a little nervous, but bear with me. All right, so next slide. Good, so the topics I would like to talk about, and just so you know, after a few sections, I will always like to give it a little like stop so you can actually ask some questions. So it's not towards the very end, which in the very end we can still have some Q&As. So first, the definition of what is stress. I think that's also something that it's important to ask ourselves and how we look at it, how it impacts our health, the stress response, so the actual physiology behind it. And I think in order to get to the remedies, which I will get to, it's really important to understand like the functions behind it, like the actual mechanisms of our bodies, like the stress hormones and the neurotransmitters, to have like an idea what's going on, and whether or not it has an impact on our health. So I talk about the like stress hormones, some of them, also some neurotransmitters, how inflammation plays a really big role when it comes to stress. And then to the most fun part, like lifestyle, nutrition, and botanicals. All right. Good, so up a table with like some botanicals that I will talk about, and they're all addressing like your stress response or the stress response. So you can put together your own like tea blends and also choose which kind of herbs you feel you could benefit the most. All right. Good. So what is stress and who has it? So stress can be understood as a mismatch from the demands placed on an individual and their individual compensation capabilities. So meaning, like the stress or the demands that is put on us from outside, but I would have to add also the stress that we put on ourselves, which I think plays a pretty big role. And if we just can't counterbalance that by, our own resilience, and we each bring our own capacity with us, how well we can deal with it. So that's individually different. And then just some examples of how, things that can lead to a lack of this balance would be existential fears, for example, partnership or family problems, difficulties at school, conflicts at work, and inflammation. Those are more like the environmental factors, but they do also, in our bodies, have the same effect as like an emotional stressor, for example. So blood sugar imbalances also lead to a cortisol spike, like the stress hormone, and toxic load, meaning all the pesticides, heavy metals, and so on in the environment also play a role with stress. All right. Good. So here's a little study from the science, the Center for Stress and Science in Switzerland. 30% of all employees complain about too much stress at work. 24 of all employees regularly show significant mental, physical exhaustion syndromes due to work stress. And 50 to 60% of work injuries are due to stress-related illnesses. And that was before the pandemic. So I could imagine these numbers did even go up a little. So this presents pretty well of how relevant stress is in our work lives and in our day-to-day lives, and how it has an effect on our physical health as well. Okay. It's going. this way. Thanks. Okay, so here's an overview of, like, just a very brief overview of the stress response of our bodies, what's actually going on. So we have the rapid stress response, also called adrenergic stress response. The offset is within seconds, and we release the so-called catecholamines. So it's adrenaline, it's norepinephrine, and it's dopamine. And these catecholamines, like the response is right away, but they also don't persist in our system. Like the half time is very short. The more delayed stress response is the endocrine, so hormonal stress response, and the onset is after minutes, and that would be cortisol or ACTH, and that also persists longer in our system. So cortisol can be measured even after like hours of actually having a stressful situation. There. Good. So let's first talk about cortisol. I think that's the major player when it comes to stress because it's the chronic stress hormone. So the function of cortisol is to adapt to the organism to acute or recurrent stress situations. The goal is activation of the metabolism and provision of energy so it increases our blood sugar, like the glucose in our system. It's activating lipolysis, so it's actually increasing cholesterol. The temperature is increasing, the emotional activation is also increasing, and pain is inhibited. It's also inhibiting the immune defense, and I think that's a really important point, that our immune system is also being lowered if we're under chronic stress. Even acute, but it becomes a problem if it gets chronical. So the natural killer cells and the T helper cells are being decreased. So this makes us more likely to get infections. It's a tongue twister. And also tumor progression is more likely to happen. And also the blood flow to the skin and the intestinal blood flow is being lowered, which of course will make digestion less easy and Okay, let's see. So this is how a healthy or normal cortisol curve would look like, measured with a saliva test. Cortisol is produced in the second half of the night and then being released about 1 or 2 hours after waking up. This actually helps us getting out of bed. Without this cortisol release, we wouldn't be able to actually get out of bed and start the day. So it gives us a lot of energy. So cortisol is not bad per se. It's really just if it's an unhealthy cortisol curve, which I will get to later. And then towards the afternoon, it naturally declines here. And then sometimes we get like a little peak in the afternoon again. But it should look kind of like this. Like otherwise, like if it's like lowered here, and that way we get tired and be able to sleep. Another important point is age has no influence on cortisol production. So it doesn't matter if we're 18 or 80, it's not influenced by age, but other hormones are. For example, okay, so here's just one more slide about cortisol. Here the blue line shows a healthy cortisol curve, just what I described, right? Like in the morning it's really high, and then it like almost linear declines until the evening. If we're under high stress, we have this red line, and it kind of stays up, and it goes down eventually in the evenings, but you don't really get a lot of like rest during the day. And eventually, if there's too much cortisol relieved over a long period of time, you can get to something like this, where you just don't really produce a lot of cortisol at all, and your adrenals are getting fatigued, which you probably already heard that term already. And then you have trouble like getting out of bed, getting your stuff done. And in the adrenal cortex, the age peak is saliva test. Okay, we can get to the next important hormone, which is the antagonist of cortisol, a really important one, is called DHEA, and it's also being produced in the adrenal cortex. The age peak is the maximum between 20 and 30 years, and then it rapidly declines. And it counterbalances the stress response from cortisol. So if you counterplayer basically, so it lowers cholesterol basically. It improves immunity, and it stimulates the cellular immunity, activation of natural killer cells, and motivation increase. So all the things that cortisol is lowering, this is the counterplayer basically. The only thing is that it declines when you're after you're 30 basically. But there are ways you can address this, which I will get to. Okay, so before I get to these hormones, do you guys have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, there are some at-home tests available from certain labs. I think Verisana is one. But it's really, it's a non-invasive really, and especially with cortisol and DHEA, it's a very accurate testing as well. So it's even better than via the blood. So I usually always use saliva tests. Yeah. Yeah?
Can certain sleep patterns have effect on the cortisol production?
On the what?
On the cortisol production?
Yes, certain sleep patterns can definitely, because cortisol is very much aligned with your circadian rhythm. It's actually the hormone that influences your circadian rhythm the most. And if you have an irregular sleep pattern, or if you travel, this can get thrown off. And eventually it can also lead to the adrenal fatigue. So having a regular sleep and wake rhythm can actually have a really good impact on cortisol. But sometimes you need like a little help, like light hygiene plays a big role, which I will also get to. So you can help because it's very much influenced by the how much light you are receiving during the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Big time. Yeah. Yeah. No, directly. Like with the consumption of coffee, your adrenals pump out cortisol. Yes, yeah. But it's all in it's all in balance. That's what it's about. It's not bad for everyone. So yeah. Well, do you have problems going to sleep, sleeping through, or do you feel like you're regularly? Yeah. I think if it's something that it's an exception, and but it will get into a vicious circle if you do it because you're stressed out. You're just kind of helping yourself with coffee, and then you get more stressed out because of the coffee, and so on. So eventually, addressing the stressor is exactly. But sometimes it's just necessary. So yeah. Yeah. We genetically metabolize coffee different, and we probably all know the people. I mean, in Italy, you have like the espresso after dinner, and it's completely fine. And me personally, I'm a very slow metabolizer of caffeine, so for me, the cutoff time is noon. And this is for people who have the tendency to be fatigued and they have like this adrenal dysfunction. This is what I tell them, that really just to do it in the AM. All right, good. So, yeah. Mate? Matcha? No, not as much. Yeah, it's definitely much better for it, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so now to the rapid stress response. So those are the like dopamine, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. Yeah, they get synthesized from the amino acids phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tyrosine. And they're really important cofactors for the adrenals to actually produce them. And that would be vitamin B6, B12, vitamin C, folic acid, copper, and magnesium. And I would say those are all very important nutrients to keep in mind in general to support your nervous system. And this is the most relevant for people who really feel depleted already. And you can measure this as well. This. Yeah, I will do a few more of the slides and then I'll ask, yeah, you can ask the questions again. Yeah. So just one example of the catecholamines and then we move on. It's adrenaline. So it's being made in the adrenal gland, so not the cortex. The function is, yeah, it's a very important metabolic hormone. It's stimulating and a stimulating neurotransmitter. So it's being released during physical or mental stress, and the half-life is really short, as I already mentioned. It leads to an increase in pulse rate, cardiac output, so your heart rate will go stronger. The blood pressure will go up. The mental activity is also increased. And it's also inhibiting the cellular immune response. So that's another stress hormone that is lowering our immune response. I also want to add that the stress hormones are not necessarily bad, again, like for like a presentation like this, for example. I'm sure my adrenaline is pretty high at the moment and actually increases my mental capacity. So it's a good thing. I think it's just if we are constantly under stress and we're constantly having this, then it leads to a lowered immune response and it actually leads to inflammation. That's then this is when it becomes concerning. Okay. So serotonin, which you probably all heard about, is a really nice antagonist of adrenaline and also of cortisol. It's the love hormone, right? That this is usually how we relate to serotonin. So adrenaline is very excitatory, it's very activating, and serotonin is inhibitory. So it means it's has more of a calming effect, like together with GABA. The formation is 95% in our intestinal mucosa, which I think is fascinating. So it definitely shows the really important relation between our brain and our gut, so the gut-brain. And only like 5% is being produced in the central nervous system and in our liver and spleen. So in the intestinal mucosa, it's actually, or in our digestive tract, it is responsible for, like once our tummy is full, serotonin is getting released, and then it starts the movement, basically, of the food and everything. So that is the effect on serotonin in our digestive tract, and it makes us happy at the same time. Like when we ate and when we have a full belly, I at least I'm usually pretty like happy, and this is the effect of the serotonin. Yeah, so it is getting synthesized off the amino acid tryptophan, But then it needs to take one more step towards serotonin, and that would be 5-HTP. And there's some important cofactors in order for that to happen, and that would be, again, B6 and magnesium. Yeah, so the functions of serotonin in the peripheral central nervous system, together with dopamine and norepinephrine, like it's always in a symphony, they're always working together, would be platelet homeostasis, so meaning that our blood is in a nice like homeostasis without clogging up. In the GI, the motility and absorption, as I mentioned, so it's definitely, it plays a really big role, and serotonin can also be measured in the gut. It's also possible. And people who have like irritable bowel syndrome, for example, they often have a deficiency or too much serotonin, because it also increases the pain receptibility in the GI tract. Yeah, so in the central nervous system, it's like mood elevating, it's relaxing, it regulates our sleep, it's anti-anxiety, antidepressant, as we usually associate with serotonin. It increases learning and memory, and this is also a hormone from the brain, the hypothalamus. So, yeah, let's see. Is there another one? Yeah, I want to add one more important point to the serotonin production. So in order for tryptophan, the neurotransmitter or the amino acid that is needed to actually produce or synthesize serotonin, it doesn't get synthesized into serotonin if there is inflammation in the body. If there is inflammation in the body, then it gets synthesized into something else that is very inflammatory. So again, like inflammation in our all-in-all health plays like a really big role in order to have enough serotonin in our bodies. Okay, so any other questions regarding those neurotransmitters and hormones? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can definitely take it in the morning, and I think with the B vitamins, there is also a storage, especially the B12, and you need to fill up these storages in order to have the effects. And it's not like a 24-hour, effect of this. Like it's something that you do every day. I usually think magnesium is nicer in the evenings, especially certain forms of magnesium that are really like relaxant for the muscles, like magnesium biglycinate. So I usually, as a rule of thumb, I say vitamins in the morning with food, and like minerals and trace elements in the evening, because they have more of a relaxing effect. Yeah. Yeah, I think for people who are under high stress, vitamin C is definitely good way. I mean, supplements, they should always be supplementing a healthy nutrition and lifestyle, and should just go on top. It doesn't replace like a healthy diet. Okay. Yep. No, I think it's actually, it has a protective quality, so I think either way is fine. Yeah. Yeah. But you can also take certain forms of vitamin C that you won't metabolize right away, that the effect is going to take longer, yeah. So I think it's fine either way. Yeah. Okay. Or actually even more before, because of the protective quality. All right, good. So now the inflammation, just for me, I think it's a really important point because it just creates a lot of stress, and stress also creates inflammation, so it can become a vicious cycle. So here's a study where they were looking at students who were studying for a test, and they were looking at the pro-inflammatory cytokines. So these are like messengers from our immune system that, in this case, they were looking at like the messengers which create inflammation, like interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, and so on. And the people here with a straight line, they actually had a low resilience to stress. And even the students with a high resilience, they were still seeing an increase of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So stress creates inflammation, and that's something I think, just if we ask ourselves, okay, why is stress so relevant? This is definitely a very important point, because inflammation can, just create a whole havoc with our health and our systems. Yeah. Good. So just one last overview, what the possible potentials of stress could be, or the outcomes. So yeah, it increases cortisol, it increases the catecholamines, the cytokines, which we just talked about, and even androgens, so sex hormones and LH and prolactin. So in men, it can increase estrogen, and in women, it can increase testosterone. It decreases serotonin, unfortunately, because of this inflammatory aspect. So what we just saw is it increases in inflammation in these students, and if we have these inflammatory markers, it hinders the production of serotonin. So yeah, it goes both ways. Yeah, clinically we see increased blood pressure, and yeah, the heart frequency is alternating, and in the end it might deplete our neurotransmitters, and then we're fatigued and yeah. Okay. Any other questions before we get into the fun part? Yeah.
Just about the stress, but you said also positive stress you have now. So if you would give a talk every day, would it also increase your inflammation?
Yeah. Even in these students, and there is a biological reason for it. Like when we used to have stress in the centuries ago, it was usually something that had to do with possible injury, so it would have to increase our immune system, the immune response, which is inflammation, to protect us from any kind of, bacterial infection or, anything like this. So yeah, doesn't matter. I think that there is not positive or negative stress. For me, there is short-term stress and chronic stress, and the chronic stress is what creates all the problems. Yeah. No, it's fine. It's just if we're constantly activated in a way where we pump out cortisol, and yeah, people who can't really, they get to a point where they can't really calm down and fully relax. And this happens quite a lot. There's this term wired but tired, and this is kind of the stage before you're getting into the fatigued state sometimes. Yeah. But good point. Yeah. Yeah, this depends, of course, but it's a good point. Using anti-inflammatory strategies are really important as well, because you're right. If you're reducing the emotional stress, for example, or stress at work, or whatever it is, then there is still the inflammation that then in turn also creates stress again. Yeah, so like using any kind of like, yeah, like curcuma, omega-3 oils, yeah, like these kind of things in addition can be helpful, yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, it's all about balance, right? And like cold therapy, which you probably all heard about, but also like exercise and heat therapy, like the sauna, what we're having here. This is all can be very healthy, but it is also stress on the body. Also fasting, right? It's still stress on the body, but it can actually activate a lot of healing pathways. But let's say if you're a person who are already under chronic stress and or you're going towards a fatigue syndrome, then all of these things would tip that person over the edge. So yeah, there is no one cure, like one remedy that's good for everyone. Yeah, but good point. All right, so we can get to like you can comment if you want. Yeah, sure. What we could do. So I think lifestyle is the best like base to actually start with anything like this. Like what we do in our day-to-day lives also has the biggest impact. So community is actually proven to be the most efficient dealing with stress. Like having a strong community, family, some kind of communal like tribe. Like you have your stress response will be much lower than with someone who feels lonely, for example. So community is a really, really big important part. So it's nice you're already doing a fantastic thing coming here. Exercise in moderation, again. So not that you're getting too stressed out. You do release cortisol if you exercise. But it's actually, we want cortisol in the morning. And so it's nice to like exercise in the morning to get this healthy cortisol curve and doing more like relaxing exercises in the evenings. Activation of the vagus nerve. You probably all heard of the vagus nerve. It's a part of our parasympathetic nervous system. And there are some techniques you can do to activate it. You probably all know about the breathing, like the really long out breath, but you can also gargle, and singing loud also helps. So, yeah, like gargling for like 10 minutes, like some liquid. Yeah. Or singing really loud. You might annoy your neighbors, but who cares? It's for your health. Okay, so, and this is also for the release of cortisol and serotonin, like bright light in the morning within the first 20 minutes of the day, ideally. Just getting out and getting as much natural light as possible. Not wearing sunglasses. That will help the release of like serotonin, so the happy hormone, and cortisol. And then at the same time, making sure that you don't have a lot of like artificial light in the evenings, because that will interfere with the production of melatonin. So light hygiene is also really important, and that can make a big difference. And alternatively, you can also use a light therapy lamp, because we all know, like in Berlin or Germany, in the winters, when we get up, it's usually dark. So yeah, getting out of bed quickly, no snoozing, also really helps with cortisol production. Taking a cold shower, of course, it's not for everyone, but it's also really nice for the release of cortisol in the morning. And then to get like the healthy cortisol curve, so the drop in the evening, it's good to have like a healthy, relaxing evening routine. Yeah. Like yin yoga, reading, meditation, journaling, but I think it's very individual. You can all, experiment with that, what helps you to unwind the best. Yeah?
Why is it important to have the bright light in the first 20 minutes of my effort?
Because that's, but I think that's very natural how it used to be. And It's just there are studies that show that the increase of cortisol due to the light hitting our retina, like in the eye, like don't look in the bright sun or anything, but this is the increase is the biggest if it's within this 20-minute window. Yeah. Yeah, and it's nice, you will feel much more like awake and happy during the day. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that could be one really big thing to like help you relax. And forest bathing, it's something very well documented how healing and relaxing that is. Yeah, exactly. What I was referring to is like the cortisol curve, but doing relaxing things during the day is always really like recommended and good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's lifestyle. Oh, still. Yeah, lowering inflammation. So that would be to what you were talking about, to address the stress levels as well. So if you have excess body fat, especially around the belly, it's very hormonally active, so addressing that. Having any kind of like inflammation in your oral cavity also produces inflammation, so being mindful of that. Any kind of chronic virus infections, autoimmune diseases, food intolerances that are often not being noticed but create this kind of low-grade inflammation, and also having kind of like a inflamed gut wall, so that could lead to like leaky gut. So those are all things you can address, with a healthcare practitioner. That can play a big role with like silent inflammation or low-grade inflammation. And these are some really nice compounds I like to work with. So curcuma is a very inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. Then there is one compound that is found in red grapes and red wine. It's called resveratrol, which is very anti-inflammatory, especially for the blood vessels, but also in general. Omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in like flax seeds, olive oil, fatty fish, walnuts, and so on. Vitamin C, vitamin D, licorice root, which I will get to in a little bit, lemon balm, and nettle leaves. So those are like some botanicals. Yeah, some supplementation concepts, but these are just general like things that I found to be really helpful. Of course, we're all individual and this might vary, but a B complex is really good for the nervous system. We especially need like B12, B6, folic acid, which is B9. Vitamin C, because we just need a lot of vitamin C under like high stress times for energy production. Magnesium, if you take a magnesium supplement, I would recommend taking a supplement which has different forms. There's some on the market with like 7 different forms of magnesium. I think those are good. Or you can also just take like an Epsom salt bath, which is also rich in magnesium. And the omega-3 fatty acids, as I mentioned, if you have like insomnia, migraines, depression, or adipositas, tryptophan, so that's like the precursor of serotonin, can be really helpful. But then you have to take it with the cofactors. So again, these ones. And you have to make sure that you don't have inflammation in your body, because otherwise it will not get converted into serotonin and into something else, which creates more inflammation. Instead, then you can just take 5-HTP, which will be directly synthesized to serotonin. Yeah. Okay, so nutrition. Very tryptophan-rich foods are nuts, especially cashews, soy sprouts, cacao, of course, we all love cacao. Cranberries are high in melatonin, so like the hormone that is gets diverted from serotonin, like in the evenings, which will help us sleep. It's also very anti-inflammatory. So in general, a diet of, that has a lot of healthy proteins, especially in the morning and for lunch, because if we have proteins, we also we produce more cortisols to have this healthy cortisol curve again. Complex carbohydrates more for dinner, because then you actually produce more melatonin. Avoiding processed foods, and in general, like really making sure that you stabilize your blood sugar, because if you get blood sugar spikes, it's also stress for the body. Avoiding alcohol and caffeine, and a gut healthy diet, because a healthy gut also reflects a healthy mind. It's very intertwined. So like fermented foods, fiber-rich foods, and so on. Okay, so now, healthy proteins. Well, there could be legumes, for example, so beans, lentils, quinoa has really like a lot of proteins. If it's like meat, then at least organic, like grass-fed. There's some really good, like high-quality protein powders on the market, but there's also lots of trash on the market. So really making sure that there's no added sugars, flavors, and so on. And it doesn't have to be like much, especially if you have animal protein. Fish is an option, but then like really small fish like mackerel, sardines, salmon, because if they're bigger, they usually contain a lot of like heavy metals. So those would be some examples. Yeah.
What about seitan? Because I can't eat soy.
Okay. If you seitan is like pure gluten. So tempeh. How about tempeh? Do you like that? It's like fermented. No, it's not.
Soy, no, fermented.
Oh, it can be soy, but it can also be other legumes. Yeah.
Because I can't eat it. I would like to idealistically be vegan.
Yeah. 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 I mean, if you can tolerate eggs, if you don't have a food sensitivity, eggs can be also really healthy and a good source. Yeah. But there's so many other like legumes, like black beans, beluga lentils that are really high in protein. So you can experiment with that. Yeah. And lots of people have this issue with soy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because of its estrogenic effects? I would say in general, don't have the heavy processed stuff. But you can have edamame, you can have some like tofu, as long as it's like soy products in general, like can be really like processed. But as long as that's not the case, I think it's completely fine. And also for the phytoestrogens, it's like the controversy about it. It's proven that it actually has a very protective effect of like breast cancer and all of this, and it actually has the very like positive effects on like what estrogen does. So like for bone density, like heart health and all of this. So there are actually lots of studies that show that. So no, yeah, okay, good. So now to my favorites, the botanicals. So that's the last slide. Thanks for hanging in there. I think nature has so much to offer when it comes to balancing stress, and these 5 herbs are also out there on the table. So I would recommend picking 3 out of 5 and then making a blend out of the 3. So you can listen to what I'm explaining, and then you can see what you relate the most to, or what you think would make the most sense to have and take home with you. We do have licorice root, which is an adaptogen, which is a term that's been thrown around a lot nowadays. And adaptogens basically mean that this is a category of herbs that help to balance our stress response. So it can go either way. Licorice has been really helpful for people who have very low cortisol because it actually has a cortisol-like effect. So it's anti-inflammatory. It really helps to, increase energy. It modulates all like the adrenal hormones. It's just contraindicated if you have hypertension, so high blood pressure. But that's a really, really nice one for any kind of, like also people who have chronic inflammatory bowel diseases. I think it's an amazing herb to drink to really lower inflammation in the body. Then we have St. John's wort, which is the natural antidepressant. It has the same effect as a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So it really increases serotonin levels. You just have to drink it over a time that like more than 6 weeks, and then the effect will really start working. But it's the same with these kind of pharmaceuticals as well. So it's at the same time as with every botanical, it's not just like one quality. They have like a whole array, and I'm just listing a few. But it's also very good if you have anything with the nerves, basically. So like nerve damage, nerve pain. It's very antiviral as well, and it has been used for like protection rituals for like many hundreds of years. Chamomile, which of course we all know, especially from childhood, I think, it is very anti-inflammatory. So it decreases inflammation. It's very good for like a very restless nervous system, someone who's like aggravated a lot. This can be really good. Think of like a child who's throwing like a tantrum. This is a really good one. And it's also very good if you have any kind of issues with the stomach, like stomach ulcers. It's a wonderful like healing herb as well. And it's mildly sedative. So I usually recommend drinking that in the evenings because you might get tired. So lemon balm up here. It's also a mild antidepressant, not as much as St. John's wort. It really addresses the brain axis because it works. I think it definitely has an effect on the vagus nerve. It really soothes an anxious gut that is connected to an anxious mind, which I think a lot of people have when they're really nervous. They tend to have like gut issues. So this is definitely the right herb for these kind of people. The contraindication would be if you have a low thyroid activity, because that might increase that. Then passion flower. I usually like to describe the actions of passion flower by the way it looks. It has a kind of spiral shape in the flower. So it's really good for people who have like these ever circling thoughts, especially at night that's keeping them up. And it's really nice to like calm this kind of like repetitive thinking pattern. Good for like exhaustion, relaxes the muscles. So it's good for this kind of like nervousness in combination with like twitching muscles and sore muscles. I talked about all of them. Nice. Yeah, if you want to get in touch. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Do you hear me well? Yes, good. So I think we can start, right? Good. So, first of all, I would like to thank you, the organization, on this beautiful program. Thank you so much for the invitation and to be able to share my work and my personal inspiration to approach science and then so then it's fantastic place, and the group already looks pretty beautiful, so it's an honor to be able to share here with you some ideas. So I'm from Chile. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and I did my PhD here in Berlin on the mechanism of mindfulness on the brain level. And on the personal side of things, I started to meditate when I was 17 in a Buddhist tradition, and then I entered the medical school, and I always kept the meditation part pretty much on the secret until I realized some cool and serious research was being done on meditation and mindfulness, like the Mind and Life Institute. And I have the lucky to meet Francisco Varela, who was a Chilean neuroscientist who started the kind of a serious research on mindfulness with the Dalai Lama back in the 80s and 90s. I will try to combine these views about what have been happening in the mindfulness research and also a bit of my own understanding of it. So that's why, let's go with it. So you might know this classical Buddha, the Sakyamuni Buddha, the standard figure of the Hinayana school, right? And how I would like to invite you to think is that the mindfulness movement enter into our societies because of the immense need we have, but also, you know, John Kabat-Zinn used the term mindfulness instead of using the word meditation intentionally to actually make it possible for everyone to start with a practice, but not the prejudice about meditation or esoteric stuff or anything like that back in the 70s. So in a way, mindfulness is connected to the Hinayana path, which means a personal, the path of taking responsibility of our own actions and the discipline, the precision, and the capacity of developing this presence throughout our whole life, let's say. But as you might realize, and we know it, that we usually live in our heads, and we are usually being fooled by our ideas and all these divagations and our mind wandering. So one first thing, so the mind and the brain just wanders, and this is fine. So this is one prejudice for meditation, that we have to put the thoughts aside, and that's not true and it's not possible. The brain just thinks, and that's completely fine. So, but what we also know is that in this study they give an app to thousands of people, and then they asked, what are you thinking right now, and where are your mind right now, and how are you feeling right now? And the short story is that when people tend to think about something that is not in the present moment, we get less happy. So it's normal that we will think and we will drift all the day, but it's also something that is strongly associated to feeling not so well, let's say, psychologically. So meditation, what is mindfulness then? Is one specific type of meditation. As already been said, there are many types of meditation, and mindfulness is one type of meditation that involves to do something that is basically using our attention capacities to be in the present moment, right? And to develop an attitude of acceptance. So it's not something random, it's not something miracle, it's basically to train something our brain already has, and it's plastic, which is attention. So we work with attention. But we also work with intention, no? And intention is pretty important, to remain in the present moment, right? To be here and now. And then there is a needed attitudinal frame, because when we stay in the present moment, we face what is there, and very often it's negative emotions or something challenging happening. And that's why we need this attitude of not judging or acceptance. And this attitude is really this basic frame where the practice can take place. So we could say that we are training all these three things when we meditate, and we use this specific mindfulness meditation. But to be even more specific from the Buddhist side, actually there are many mindfulness techniques. So there are shamatha, vipassana, and several sub-techniques within shamatha and vipassana that make things more complicated. But for us, at this point, mindfulness is one nice concept to refer to. So we already defined what is mindfulness and how can we scientifically study this. There are many different models, and you will see, for example, 2 measurements before. Or we can study mindfulness induction. So there can be a mindful state. And on an experiment, we induce a mindful state, and then we measure the meditation state in that specific moment. Or we can measure an intervention, like a mindfulness-based intervention, like the MBSR, for example. And this means to making, for example, 2 measurements before. Or we can study mindfulness induction. So there can be a mindful state. And on an experiment, we induce a mindful state, and then we measure the meditation state in that specific moment. Or we can measure an intervention, like a mindfulness-based intervention, like the MBSR, for example. And this means to making, for example, 2 measurements before and after the intervention. Or we can also actually approach the experts, monks, for example, or Westerners that meditate regularly, and we can call them experts, and therefore we can also investigate them. So you can see there are at least 4 forms to empirically investigate the effects of this practice. So what do we, for example, for the mindfulness-based intervention, so let's say the first question, of course, it's really going to have an effect on my mental health. So the first kind of clinical question all the time is this really useful, right? What will be the effects I will get from it? And from different meta-analysis, we can say for healthy and also for clinical population, mindfulness-based interventions have comparable effects to other evidence-based treatments. So it's not superior to CBT or other therapies. It's equal or similar or non-different in treating specifically anxiety, depressive symptoms, but also helping with pain, chronic pain, for example, and also helping in addictions like smoking, for example. The next one, here we go. This is just a general overview of how many mindfulness-based interventions we have, and there are so many, much more. These are the most established ones. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what they have in common is that they are operationalized, systematic interventions that usually takes 8 weeks, and they incorporate mindfulness plus psychoeducation plus some CBT interventions plus yoga, so it's not purely mindfulness. So the idea is to offer the participants different tools to be able to learn how to cultivate mindfulness with different opportunities like mindful yoga, mindful eating, but of course mindfulness, formal and informal meditation practices. And because they target a specific group of patients, these interventions actually are framed and embedded in a specific conceptual understanding of the condition. So these are not just learning to meditate and that's it. You really get to learn a specific conceptual understanding of stress, for example, as in let's call it the mother workshop, which is the MBSR, or the MBCT is specifically for depression. So what you will get there is mindfulness adapted for taking care of depression, for example. And all of these programs have evidence for treating these conditions that I'm not going to read all of them, but these are kind of the main evidence that these workshops are good for. So you might have heard that meditation or mindfulness can have an impact in the brain. And this is true, but we have to ponderate this. And this is one of the best published studies on the meditation world by Tang et al. 2015 on Nature Neuroscience. And in this review, they summarize the findings on this interesting brain diagram. So we can see that overall mindfulness can affect the brain in the specific brain regions. For example, let's start by the insula. Have you heard about this brain region? Yes, it's like the sixth sense we have. It's involved in interoception, so how the brain makes sense of the bodily states. And this area is crucial for emotional processing, but also for empathy. So we have effects on this area that, of course, has to do with how meditation helps us to be more aware of our own body, for example. It makes sense that the insula then pops up. And then we have posterior cingulate cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, more connected to self-awareness, attention control, and prefrontal regions connected to emotional regulation, attention also, and then more low-level emotional regions like the striatum and the amygdala processing stress. Kind of the amygdala is always the classical evil, although it's not always processing negative emotions. It's also connected to face perception or even positive emotions as well. And of course, striatum, an area on the basal ganglia that is connected to reward processing and affiliation and positive emotions in general. So if we make the connections of these areas, we can start to, in a way, make sense of what could be the mechanisms of mindfulness meditation. And the big picture is basically that mindfulness can affect our attention capacities, or emotional regulation, or self-awareness, or maybe a bit of the three of them, and therefore affecting self-regulation in general. So let's give a little detour of this research. So this is kind of a big summary, and now let's take a little look at what happened when we meditate. So in this study, they took novel practitioners, so people that never done meditation, and teach them mindfulness of the breath. So a very simple technique that maybe you have done already. And what happened, so they compare it with this mind wandering, so just letting the mind think on anything. And comparing both, we can see this, that when we focus on the breath, we have higher activation in the insula, this region for interoception. We can see it here. Anterior cingulate cortex, TPJ, so areas connected to attention control or sensory integration, so in a way being aware of the present experience, in a way, our bodily experience. But when we go mind wandering, for example, we get a higher activation in these other brain regions, in the midline regions, including the precuneus and the middle prefrontal, that are connected to this default mode network. So this default mode network is a network in the brain connected to mind wandering and to be off our thoughts. So this all makes sense in a way. When we mind wander, we go out from the present bodily experience. If we feel the body, fantastic, the brain will do it for us. And this is kind of, the brain correlates of all this. But when we actually meditate, we're doing so many little things in our minds that in this review, they nicely summarize this for us. Because let's think we are following this diagram. We thought, okay, we're gonna focus my mind in my breath feelings in the body, right? And this is what I want to do. But all of a sudden comes some thoughts and we go away with it. And then comes this default mode network that runs this distraction. But then I realized, hey, come on, the focus of my mind changed already. So I need to, I'm now being aware that I'm not in the present moment anymore. And this is the salience network working here that is monitoring if something have happened. And yes, something happened. My mind is not in the present. And this is the salience network. So it's a different network that will alert us on this. And then we will disengage from the thoughts with another network called the executive network. And then we'll be able to reorient our attention to the focus by the orienting network. And then we can focus on the object again with this alerting network. So it's fascinating how just staying in the present moment and remaining the attention in the body, very often without our control, and networks that we can see here orchestrating this little consciousness movement that we are doing while we're seated. So another aspect of meditation is the effect on emotions. So we know that throughout the day, our emotions will be changing very often without our control. And we will change through different emotional states. And what we hope and what we maybe all of us do meditation is to be able to learn how to deal with emotions in a different way. How we deal with emotions, how we treat them, and how we try to modify them, we can define it as emotional regulation. So in this review, we summarize all the connections and the effects of meditation or mindfulness more specifically with emotional regulation. And we can see that there are many ways of looking at this. So one way of thinking on this association is thinking of mindfulness as a trait. So again, mindfulness as a characteristic, someone who can be spontaneously mindful. And people who can do this have been shown to have lower psychopathology, lower neuroticism, and they engage more likely in self-caring behaviors. What strikes from mediation studies is that people with higher mindfulness also, they have higher emotional clarity. They're more aware of their emotions. And therefore, the consequence of this might be the lower of the personal distress. So we think that then this is kind of one effect over the emotional processing or the emotional regulation. But what we also review in this is that people that have higher mindfulness traits, when they are asked to label their emotions, so do you know what is labeling emotions, right? It's like when you have an emotion, you can find the right label for that emotion. Doing that requires our emotional awareness. We have to, first of all, be aware we have an emotion. And then we also need to find the right label somewhere in our system, right? And then we match them. And when we do that, that's already emotional regulation. Doing that makes the connection of the prefrontal cortex with the amygdala, and we can calm down. So people with higher mindfulness can have a better connection between the prefrontal and the amygdala. So they have a higher connectivity between these two regions. So they're more able to calm down the amygdala more easily while labeling their emotions. But what happened with the intervention? So one problem of the mindfulness trait is that it is cross-sectional. So when we do something, when we measure it one time, we don't know if this is really the effect of meditation, or it's just people that are more calm tend to meditate more. We actually cannot disentangle this. That's why we need these longitudinal studies in which we measure people before and after. So we recruit people that never meditated before, and we give them meditation, and then we see what the effects we have. So long story short, the effects are kind of similar to the ones up. So we have people doing these mindfulness interventions. They get the decrease in stress, burnout, depressive symptoms, chronic pain, increasing well-being. And what are the potential mediation mechanisms? Is the decrease on emotional and cognitive reactivity, decrease in rumination. So all these negative, repetitive thinkings that we have, that we tend to have even more when we have negative emotions, for example, we learn how to lead with emotions in a different way. And what is interesting is the increases in self-compassion. So although mindfulness programs do not teach explicitly self-compassion, they teach it implicitly, because we are learning how to embrace emotions in a friendly perspective, let's say. And this has also shown to increase self-compassion, and with this, decrease the symptomatology. So on the brain level, we see also similar effects on different experiments showing higher brain activation in prefrontal regions. But what is also interesting is that the increases in the insula, that is also kind of a emotional processing region, might be involved in the benefits. So what we build up on this is that there might be effects of meditation on the top-down level, so let's say cognitively speaking, but there might be some effects from the bottom-up system, which is kind of a primarily affecting the way we perceive or the way we sense emotions in itself, not just how we control them. So top-down would be kind of a pretty much a cognitive control, and bottom-up will be like saying we learn how to feel differently the emotion. And it's a thing that can be also soothing, not just when we approach an emotion directly, we just increase the emotion, but if we have the learning, we can actually feel the emotion and embrace it and not getting more stress from it, which could be specifically for mindfulness. So therefore, we came out with this model and this idea that mindfulness could help us from the top down, dealing with thoughts and cognition, or also the other way, how we find emotions in the body influencing the sensory processing, interoception, proprioception, and so on. And this can be built down into a specific kind of psychological interventions, for example. Top-down strategies include affect labeling, detachment, reification, cognitive reappraisal, and so on. But we have also strategies from the bottom up, which are very common also to body-oriented psychotherapists. It's not also exclusive for mindfulness, but which means basically the direct exposure to feelings, for example, multimodal sensations, or being able to feel a perceptual space. So basically all what has to do with exposing ourselves to our internal bodily feelings. So after some years of mindfulness research, the same researchers started to go back to Buddhism and say, hey, what else can we get inspired from, and what are the new challenges? And they realized that mindfulness, and what I'm not saying here, but also some studies have shown that mindfulness, even my own dissertation, mindfulness has not so much effects over empathy or social processes. And we have, because of the mindfulness boom in a way, we have thought that mindfulness is a miracle thing, that we can get cure for everything from it. And it's actually not the case. So mindfulness is fantastic for self-awareness, emotional regulation, decreasing stress, and so on. But when it comes to the social level, let's say, the generalization of these effects are not there in a way. And this is fine. I mean, after 8 weeks of meditating, we cannot ask so much from it beyond really learning that this is a powerful technique, can help me feel better, regulate my emotions better, but not necessarily going out and being more empathetic, more compassionate, more attuned to others. This really needs a second step, another step of learning. And this is what Buddhists have already found 2,000 years ago. That's why they have a second path called the Mahayana, which means the wide path, which includes working with others, helping others. Even this image of the Bodhisattva, which is basically offering him or herself to work with the suffering of others even before working with himself. And this is the image of Avalokiteshvara, which is the compassion Buddha, let's say, that has very nice tools to deal with suffering. But what's interesting one is this mudra here, which means the unity of samsara and nirvana. So it says both are united. This is the real acceptance, that both are inseparable in a way. So similarly for mindfulness, how we investigate compassion from a scientific point of view. What is compassion? First of all, we can spend a whole weekend maybe defining compassion, but we will just keep it brief. It's feeling for and caring for the other. We can say, for example, empathy is feeling with the other, right? We can empathize with others. We can feel as the other feel. For example, someone is in pain, I can feel the pain, or let's say a congruent emotion in myself. But compassion is going one step further. It's really after feeling this empathy, we can also feel for the other person, right? We can also feel that the other person is having pain and wishing the other person feel better. So having in connection with suffering, there is also a wish or an intention of alleviating the other suffering. So that requires a bit more than empathy. That's why empathy and compassion is not the same. So just as mindfulness, we can investigate it. I'm going to go quick here. As a trait, we can measure how compassionate someone is. We can induce a compassionate state. We can measure a compassion-based intervention. And we can investigate experts. And what we see, if they're helpful in a way on a clinical perspective, yes, they are helpful. They can also improve well-being and decrease psychopathology in general, but they might have even more benefits. Similarly to the mindfulness-based interventions, we have compassion-based interventions that have been developed in different research centers all over the world. I mean, all over the world, let's say mainly the US and Germany, but kind of like that. So you will see there are different programs that there is a mindful self-compassion training, which I'm a instructor, which focus more on self-compassion, for example. There is a cultivating emotional balance, more on the emotional kind of thing. This is developed in Emory, this is from Stanford, and this is the one from Berlin, the resource training. And this one is specifically for working with people that help chronic end life caring, basically. So hospitage and people with working in end of life caring. Good. So how does compassion arise? Paul Gilbert is one of the main researchers in the UK on compassion since many, many, many years. And he said that we have an innate system for taking care and for self-regulation or regulating or taking care of others. But we also have two other more systems that say the threat-oriented system, that is let's say, also can be called the stress system that is always looking for problems. And when we are driven by this system, everything that we look will feel threatening for us, right? So someone look at us with a neutral face and we will interpret it as negative. Yeah, this person is angry at me. And now why is angry at me? And then we go negative and so on and so on. So when we have this system overactivated, everything is stressful, everything is threatening, and we can go easily into anger, anxiety, or depressive symptomatology. So the interesting thing is that we have an innate system that we have inherited from our evolutionary to take care. And this might be driven, for example, that we as human beings, we are born very immature. So if we don't have a good mother or a good father behind, we will just basically die. So we are so slow, right? We take years to talk, to walk, and even to get autonomous, we can get 20 years to make our life independently. So that's crazy, right? So that means that we rely so much in a caring system, someone taking care of us, someone who was there. Yeah. So we have this system, the caring system for self-regulation, social connection, safety, and this system is activated when we feel safe. So that's all this idea of the safe space is because a safe space actually have the quality, the environmental quality or the interpersonal quality to decrease the activation of this system, and therefore when we feel safe we can connect. And this is the crucial of this diagram. But what happens when we are in burnout, when we are running on chronic stress, of course this system goes up pretty high. The other system of wanting and pursuing that I haven't spoke so much, but anyway also goes down. We don't want to go out and work or do our things in the world. We get demotivated and our resources for regulation goes down. And this is strange language here, but the interesting thing is this is meta-analysis of brain activations on compassion, but not people meditating. It's just studies investigating compassion in people and how this looks in the brain. And what we have after this meta-analysis is that people that have higher compassion, they have higher activation in this nucleocauda here, areas connected to affiliation or reward processing. But also they have higher activation in the insula and in the inferior frontal gyrus, so areas connected to emotional regulation and also empathy. So from a brain point of view, compassion might be something like feeling close to the other, feeling affiliated, but also feeling rewarded by this feeling of connectedness. But ourselves when we are with someone else that is in suffering. That's why it's beyond empathy, and that's why we need to train compassion, because it's not so easy in a way. So self-compassion is basically having all those feelings that with the negative experience of the other, but also of ourselves when we are with someone else that is in suffering. That's why it's beyond empathy, and that's why we need to train compassion, because it's not so easy in a way. So self-compassion is basically having all those feelings that we have understood now as feeling for the other, but feeling for ourselves. And this might be tricky because we are so well trained to take care of others that a lot of people, and the studies shown that even up to 75% of people are less compassionate toward themselves than to others. So it's much more easy to be compassionate to others because there is another looking at us. So we show everything good we have, we are very intelligent, we really put on the shoes of the other, but when we are suffering ourselves and we are alone with ourselves, right, we are pretty tough with ourselves. So self-compassion is to having the same compassion we would have for our best friend, but to have that compassion towards yourself. And self-compassion is also a hidden revolution in psychology because it's a new self-esteem. Self-esteem is based in comparison. So self-esteem needs always going up, but sometimes and very often in life we are not always going up, right? And therefore self-esteem is going down because we're going down. But self-compassion is always there for us because it's basically compassion is willing to approach and work with painful situations. So people that have higher self-compassion tend to be, as this meta-analysis can see, tend to have much lower psychopathology, lower anxiety and depressive symptoms, and higher well-being as well. And this is shown in clinical but also in healthy population. And this is another brain study in which they ask the people, they put them on the scanner and ask them to criticize themselves, right? To go again with this judgmental mind towards yourself versus being self-compassionate to yourself, having a gentle and a comprehensible voice to yourself while being exposed to certain negative adjectives. And what we can see when we contrast both conditions is that having a critical voice to yourself increases anterior cingulate, but also increases the insula and also increases the amygdala. Or the other way back, having a self-compassionate voice for yourself can help you regulate the amygdala and the insula. So in a way, basically lowering the emotional intensity you are feeling. So in the brain, we can see that talking to ourselves from the compassionate voice, let's say, versus a self-critical voice, it's already different and can help us to manage our emotions in a way. So let's go back to meditation. So I said there are many types of meditation, and these are the three most investigated in the research. And what is interesting to see, if we can look at here, is the critical point being here is what we do with our mind will really, it's really important. So every meditation technique is really a setting of instructions of what to do with our whole mind while we do this technique. It's really like a set of instructions. And what we can see here is at least the three more basic techniques proposes quite a different things, and therefore they might have quite some different effects. So focus attention, like the kind of shamatha practice, focusing on the body, is more attentional focus, more on interoception, but little work on the emotional or the attitudinal level. It's really like being in the breath, and that's it. It's more calming in a way, of course. But if we want to go and open up to the perceptual world, for example, we might need to practice open meditation or vipassana, that you really open up to the perceptions, working more with the attitudinal part, more emotional work. But here we have compassion meditation, which includes a bit of attention, less perception, but it's very strongly on the attitudinal aspect, on the emotional aspect, and of course, the interpersonal aspect. So in a way, compassion meditation practices are really using much more of the mental resources, images, text, voices. It's like using the whole mind to generate an emotional state in a way. So it's much more complex and therefore can be much more challenging than the classical mindfulness techniques. So this is one example of compassion interventions, in this case an app-based compared to three other groups, and they were shown in the scanner different narratives of people having suffering. And what they saw is that after the compassion training, there were longitudinally some changes again in orbitofrontal cortex, some area of emotional regulation, let's say, and also, yeah, that's kind of the most important part. So, yeah, just interesting. This is 4 weeks only, and this is a smartphone app for compassion intervention. So it's one of the interesting studies. And let's go now quickly to the resource project. So I told you there was one program and one pretty big research done in Germany. And this was a project directed by Tanya Singer, one of the leading researchers in the empathy world. And they got a grant for 5 million euros 10 years ago to develop the biggest ever meditation study. And this study aimed to disentangle the differences of these 3 main pillars of meditation. Again, one that could be called presence, more attention focus. The other one called perspective, more, let's say, vipassana or open monitoring practice. And another one called affect or compassion modeled. So she created, there was a big team. They created 3 different workshops in order to test like specifically on the mechanisms of the 3 of them. And they have a very sophisticated crossover model, so a lot of different groups with different orders and cross controls and very sophisticated methodology. So they use specific behavioral techniques to actually measure the effects of these 3 different models. Long story short, they could see that the attention program in yellow was able to increase attention. So attention changes are here, but also the compassion program in red was also able to increase attention, for example. Changes in compassion were only seen in the compassion group. So it's interesting because with the compassion training, you can maybe get both effects, attention and the compassion itself. And the theory of mind changes were only seen in the green program. And they were also, these changes were accompanied, were going together with changes in the brain. So each of these 3 programs had differential, and the changes were going together with the behavioral. So short story effect or the compassion program, more in insula or also in cingulate cortex, and the perspective also changes in other cognitive areas. So there was some specificity on these changes. So, and the changes were going together with the behavioral. So short story, what we're thinking here is that it really matters which meditation you practice. So if you do the focused attention meditation, you will get a more calming effect, more focusing effect. If you go for vipassana techniques, for example, there will be a differential effect. So you have more effects on this kind of perspective taking. Yes? For? Enlightenment. The 3 of them. So we will see now. The Buddhist path will tell you we need the 3 wheels, the 3 paths in order to get enlightenment in this lifetime. Yes. So, yes. So, but the interesting thing is the differential effect. So it depends in a way on the intention and what we need to train, right? So maybe I need, at some point of my life, I need to train more compassion, and therefore I need to do this kind of work. or in other changes we have so much stress, so much happening, and we need to ground ourselves and to slow down, then we need focused attention practices, right? So it's a way of knowing how my mind is right now, what do I need right now, which set of tools do I need to open to work with this in a way. Good, let's go to the last part. So according to different Buddhist tradition, there is also a third path. Yes, there is support for this path, the Vajrayana path or the Tantric path. Yes, fantastic. We can get enlightened in this lifetime. It's important. There are a lot of representation. This is Vajrakilaya, and the fascinating thing is that they have wrathful deities. So when I first heard about this, hey, deities, they're not supposed to be nice, but no, we have wrathful deities. And they embody, in a way, the possibility of transcending the aggression of anger, for example. So anger is not wrong in itself. The problem with anger is aggression, for example. So we need to learn to work with aggression, but anger might have some wisdom behind, for example. And this is kind of the logic of the Vajrayana, plus many other things that we don't have time to discuss, but one of the critical points is that we need to work with the world as it is, and all our life is one possibility to wake up. And this brings me to the latest kind of integration of mindfulness into our kind of westernized life, which I want to briefly summarize then. So one aspect I've been working lately is on developing a communication program. So many of the effects of meditation and even compassion has to do with we can feel more compassion for ourselves and for others. But what happens when we just step up and do our life is that we can mess it up again and again. So there is something missing there, which is really the final step towards really using these tools in social interaction domains. So I've been working on developing this program for mindfulness and compassion in communication, which integrates the latest finding on the science perspective, but also latest developments like, for example, mindful communication. So applying these tools really more customized to social interaction through communication. And why to do this? Because we know good intentions are not enough. We can have the best intention, we can have a huge experience with our compassion, but then we go up and our attachment styles, our habitual patterns come in the middle and we might mess it up again. So the final aim is to cultivate something that I've been conceptualizing that I call cultivate relational resilience and relational well-being. And relational resilience is basically how we can really navigate our negative emotions while we are in a relationship, how we can really recover ourselves to be able to deal with conflicts that actually are natural to relationships. So all relationships might have ups and downs, and this is natural. And even more, some family therapists say all couples are incompatible. What we need to learn is how to make this compatible, how to handle those conflicts. So so how we can learn to recover from difficulties in order to be able to show up again for the other in a way. And relational well-being is basically how we can actually have more joy together, let's say, how we can actually get have a higher sense of well-being on a specific relationship, let's say. Good. That's work in progress, and if you're interested, we can discuss more about that later. But other latest development, of course, you know about this, is all the mindfulness apps that have been shown up lately, and we know that well-designed apps, for example, can have actually very similar effects to the standard meditation interventions, right? Decrease stress, increase well-being. The problem with the meditation apps is that there is no group effect that is very significant for the for interventions, but they're very, very much available for us, and they are also showing really promising results. And also, there are VR-based mindfulness apps. Problem is a low accessibility, but they have also shown a stress reduction and higher well-being effect. So this is something that is growing up a lot, and we will see that in the future we might have several multimodal sound plus mindfulness, VR applications and so on. So just to go closing, one of the latest, as you might be pretty much aware, there's a huge boom now in psychedelics and their applications into therapy, into well-being, and one interesting area of mindfulness development is to actually how we can support the psychedelic therapy with mindfulness, or how we can integrate both together. One interesting point is the potential common mechanisms of both, for example. So we can think of both working on the consciousness level, so we are learning to be more conscious, or we are learning to be familiarized with altered state of consciousness. This is a discussion, because I don't know if meditation is this. But one interesting view from but is definitely a common target in the consciousness level. But there might be eventually some affective or motivation effects that are common to both. Effects more on emotional level, for example. But one interesting view from Paine and these authors is that the psychedelics can offer us kind of these huge experiences in which we can really point out our compass again toward a new horizon, or have a better vision of what we really need for life, of what we really want us to develop, or what we really need to work. Therefore, we can think of psychedelics experiences are initiating or motivating certain aspects that maybe with mindfulness we cannot get this huge experience from the very beginning. And with mindfulness comes then what we would call the skillful means. So all this, what we see in one of these experiences that is like fantastic, but then how do I do it? So we still have to wash the dishes, right, the next day. And we need much more other skills to really walk the path. And therefore, the psychedelic experience is not, in itself, is not gonna solve everything, right? So mindfulness can help us, of course, in this next step, like integration, deepening, and generalizing those new perspectives and discoveries we have. So, for example, we can envision this in a much more specific way, this integration. For example, how we approach a specific microdose experience, for example. Before in any of those experiences, we might need to develop a sense of, is this not the right moment to engage in this experience? How available are my resources to tolerate, to be able to throw myself into this experience? In a way, mindfulness can help us to calibrate the microscope for investigation. So we will be using our mind to investigate the mind in the psychedelic experience, but we can think of, we need to calibrate our observation tools, which is our own self, right? And this is helpful also here. But then during the experience, we need to navigate a challenging experience, and therefore we can have some tools like being able to detach when it's too intense, being able to de-reify when we have also, again, too much intensity, but also an attitudinal frame. So one critical aspect here is the experiential avoidance. So experiential avoidance is how we tend to avoid negative experience, let's say, roughly speaking. But when there are microdoses experiences, very often we need to face this kind of experience, and therefore having this attitudinal frame again is very predictive of having a better, let's say, experience in the microdose. So experiential avoidance. And finally, it's also part of the attitudinal frame during this kind of experience is to have this feeling of an own self-guidance through this thing, right? And therefore, self-compassion can be a good copilot again throughout this experience. Basically asking myself, what do I really need right now, for example, during this experience of what do I really want to work, etc., etc. And after the experience, then we can come back to this question, so how do I walk the talk? The dishes are still waiting for us. After this huge transformative experience, we anyway will need to deal with our daily life and so on. So I think this is much for today. And the summary is that, yeah, kind of summarized with this. I hope you have please, questions, comments, whatever. Thank you for your attention.
Sombra hermana, camina cerca de mí, atrapa toda la energía que fluye aquí. Sombra hermana, espejo de humo, sal de ahí. Toca, abraza mi luz, saca lo que pudre desde la raíz. Sombra hermana, gemela de agua, prepara tus manos, mi pueblo israelí. Sombra hermana, estás ahí. Sí te escucho, sí te siento, estoy aquí. Desciende la medicina.